"Please stop doing that forbidden thing," she cried, but the rancher didn't, and the town went mad. The town of Cedar Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Its streets were lined with small, modest houses, and the local school's bell could be heard echoing across the fields in the mornings. Life moved slowly here, and the people took comfort in routine. The sun rose over the gentle hills each day, painting the skies in warm shades of orange and gold, and the townspeople greeted each other with smiles, nods, and friendly waves. It was a town where news traveled fast, and every small event became the topic of conversation by evening. On the outskirts of Cedar Creek, a ranch stretched across several acres of land. Unlike the neatly kept farms surrounding it, this ranch had a rugged, untamed appearance. The fence was weathered and the barn, though sturdy, looked old and slightly worn. The man who owned this land, Tom, had lived there for years, keeping mostly to himself. Tom was a tall man, strong from years of hard work, with calloused hands and a quiet voice that rarely raised above a calm murmur. He had an air of mystery about him that both intrigued and unsettled the townspeople. People respected him for his skills and independence, but they also whispered behind his back. Some wondered what exactly he did on his land late at night. Others avoided the topic entirely, not wanting to seem curious or nosy. Emily worked at the small general store in the center of town. She was well liked by the townspeople for her kindness, honesty, and willingness to help anyone in need. Emily's days were usually filled with stocking shelves, serving customers, and chatting with neighbors. She loved the simplicity of her life, the way she could see the same familiar faces every day, and the feeling of safety that Cedar Creek provided. But one summer afternoon, something unusual caught her attention, something that made her heart race with unease. It started when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of Tom's ranch. At first, she thought it might be a simple fire for clearing old wood or burning debris, but the smoke seemed heavier, darker, and more persistent than usual. Curiosity mixed with concern, Emily decided to keep an eye on the ranch from a safe distance. Over the next few days, she began noticing other strange things. Lights flickered at night when no one should have been working. Loud noises echoed from the barn, and occasionally, a smell that was unfamiliar and sharp drifted toward the edge of the town. It was unlike anything Cedar Creek had seen before, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Emily was torn. She respected Tom's independence and knew that he had the right to do what he wanted on his property, but she also felt a sense of responsibility toward her neighbors and the town. The more she observed, the more she realized that she could not ignore what was happening. Her concern grew each day, and she could feel a knot of worry forming in her chest every time she thought about the potential dangers. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself that perhaps she was overreacting, that maybe it was just ordinary ranch work she didn't understand. But deep down, her instincts told her otherwise. After days of watching and worrying, Emily finally made the decision to confront Tom. She knew it would not be easy. He was a private man who did not welcome visitors, especially ones who questioned his actions. Yet she could not remain silent. She approached the ranch cautiously one late afternoon, when the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Her heart pounded as she walked along the worn path that led to the barn. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she reminded herself that she was doing this for the safety of the town, for the well-being of her neighbors, and perhaps even for Tom himself. When she arrived at the edge of the barn, she saw Tom standing near a stack of crates, examining something that emitted a faint, eerie glow. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm but guarded. Emily took a deep breath, summoning all her courage, and spoke. "Please stop doing that forbidden thing," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "I don't understand what you're doing, but it seems dangerous. I'm worried for you and for all of us." Tom's eyes studied her carefully. For a moment he said nothing. Then he shook his head slowly and replied, "Emily, I know what I'm doing. You don't need to worry about me. This is my land, my choice. No one else has a say in what happens here." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She wanted to argue, to explain how her concern came from a place of care, but she realized that Tom was not going to change his mind easily. She nodded, trying to hide her fear and disappointment, and turned to leave. Yet as she walked back toward town, she could not shake the image of the glowing crates and the strange activity she had witnessed. Something about it lingered in her mind like a shadow, refusing to disappear. When Emily returned to the town, she shared her concerns with a few trusted friends. They listened carefully, some skeptical, some worried. Rumors began to spread quietly at first, whispers growing louder with each passing day. People speculated about what Tom might be doing, whether it was harmless experimentation or something that could put the entire town at risk. Some residents believed that Emily was overreacting, that Tom was simply eccentric, and that there was no real danger. Others, however, agreed with her fears and felt that something needed to be done. Even though Emily felt anxious about the attention she had drawn, she also felt a sense of responsibility. She could not ignore what she had seen, nor could she turn her back on the town she loved. She spent her evenings walking past the ranch, keeping a watchful eye and documenting any unusual activity. Each day, her concern grew, and so did the tension among the townspeople. Cedar Creek, once peaceful and routine, began to feel a subtle shift in the air. There was an underlying sense of anticipation, as if something big was about to happen, something that would change the quiet town forever. Throughout all this, Emily also wrestled with her own doubts and fears. She wondered if she had done the right thing by confronting Tom. Would the town support her if something went wrong? Could she have handled it differently? Yet, despite her uncertainty, she knew one thing for certain: she could not stay silent. Her courage, fueled by care for her community, had set events in motion that would soon test the limits of the town's patience, the boundaries of Tom's stubbornness, and the strength of Emily's resolve. And so, the stage was set. Cedar Creek, with its rolling fields, quiet streets, and friendly faces, was about to face a series of events that would challenge everything its people believed about safety, responsibility, and courage. Little did Emily know, her decision to speak out would ignite a chain reaction, drawing the entire town into a story of defiance, fear, and ultimately, resilience. Emily could not shake the unease that had settled over her since her visit to Tom's ranch. Every time she walked through the town of Cedar Creek, she felt eyes on her, not in suspicion, but in quiet curiosity. People whispered as she passed by, and she could sense the growing tension that had begun to ripple through the streets. The small town, usually calm and predictable, was starting to feel restless, almost as if the air itself carried a sense of impending change. At the general store, Emily tried to continue her daily routines. She stocked shelves, rang up customers, and helped carry bags for the elderly residents who came to shop. Yet, her mind kept returning to the ranch. The strange glow from the crates, the unusual sounds at night, and Tom's refusal to listen weighed heavily on her. She knew that ignoring the problem would only make it worse. Emily felt a deep responsibility not only for her neighbors, but also for the town itself. She was determined to protect Cedar Creek, even if it meant putting herself in uncomfortable situations. One afternoon, Emily gathered the courage to speak again. She approached Tom's ranch carefully, walking along the familiar dirt path that led to his barn. She carried with her not only her concern, but also a sense of purpose. When she reached the edge of the property, she saw Tom moving about, carrying tools and inspecting his work. Taking a deep breath, Emily called out to him, "Tom, please listen to me again. What you are doing, it could hurt someone. It could hurt this town." Tom stopped what he was doing and turned slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were steady and firm. "Emily," he said quietly, "I've already told you. I know what I'm doing. No one else needs to interfere." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that perhaps Tom would listen the second time, that her sincerity might reach him. But his stubbornness was as solid as the old barn behind him. Despite her disappointment, she tried once more to explain. "I'm not trying to interfere in your life, Tom. I just want to make sure no one gets hurt. We all care about this town, and your actions, they could have serious consequences." For a moment, Tom said nothing. Then he shook his head. "I appreciate your concern, Emily, but you have to trust me. Everything I am doing has a purpose, and I will not stop because of fear or gossip." Emily turned away, feeling a mixture of frustration and fear. She knew that confrontation alone would not be enough. If Tom refused to listen, she needed another way to protect the town. She walked back to Cedar Creek with her thoughts racing. Her friends and neighbors began noticing her worried expression and asked what was wrong. Emily hesitated at first, unsure how much to reveal. But eventually, she decided she could not carry this burden alone. She shared what she had seen, describing the glowing crates, the strange noises, and Tom's refusal to stop his activities. Her words spread quickly, first in hushed whispers and then in more public conversations. The townspeople were divided. Some dismissed Emily's concerns, believing that Tom was simply eccentric and that there was no real danger. Others were alarmed and began discussing ways to address the situation. The town council received inquiries from worried residents, and debates about responsibility, safety, and privacy began to dominate conversations in Cedar Creek. Emily felt both relieved and anxious. She was relieved that some people took her concerns seriously, but anxious about the growing tension. She understood that the situation was delicate. Tom was a respected member of the community in many ways, and confronting him publicly could escalate the conflict. At the same time, she knew that ignoring the issue could be far more dangerous. The town she loved was on the edge of a difficult decision, and Emily felt the weight of her role in guiding it toward safety. As days passed, Emily noticed more unusual activity at the ranch. The glow from the crates became brighter at night, and the noises grew louder and more complex. She began to observe patterns, noting the times when the activity was heaviest. Emily also noticed that some of Tom's neighbors had begun leaving notes on his gate, politely asking him to consider their safety. Tom ignored these notes, and the messages often disappeared as mysteriously as they had appeared. The tension in Cedar Creek began to affect everyone. Parents warned their children not to go near the outskirts of town. Shopkeepers discussed the situation quietly with their customers. Even the local schoolteachers spoke cautiously about the events, reminding students to be aware of their surroundings. Emily felt a mix of pride and sorrow. She was proud that her concerns had sparked awareness, but she was sorrowful that the town's calm had been disturbed. She never wanted Cedar Creek to feel unsafe, yet she also knew that awareness was necessary for protection. One evening, Emily decided to gather a small group of trusted neighbors. She wanted to share her observations and discuss possible ways to ensure everyone's safety without creating unnecessary conflict. The group met in her living room, where the windows overlooked the hills leading to Tom's ranch. Emily explained what she had seen in detail, showing the patterns she had noticed, describing the sounds and lights, and emphasizing the potential risks. Her friends listened attentively, some nodding in agreement, others frowning in concern. "We can't ignore this," one neighbor said. "If what Emily says is true, it could be dangerous for the town." Another added, "But we also have to be careful. Tom is stubborn and proud. If we confront him the wrong way, it could make things worse." The group discussed their options. They considered talking to the town council again, gathering more evidence, and even reaching out to authorities if necessary. Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. She realized that protecting the town would require careful planning, patience, and courage. It was not enough to simply warn Tom. They had to be proactive in ensuring safety while respecting his rights. Over the next few days, Emily and her group observed Tom from a distance. They kept records of his activities, noting the times of day, the sounds, and the lights. Emily continued to visit the general store, where she subtly gauged the opinions of other townspeople. The town was slowly becoming aware of the situation, and discussions about Tom's actions began to spread beyond her small circle of friends. The tension was palpable, but it was also fueled by a desire to protect the community. Despite the growing anxiety, Emily refused to let fear control her actions. She remained calm, thoughtful, and deliberate. She reached out to other neighbors, encouraging them to remain vigilant but also patient. She reminded everyone that the goal was not to create conflict, but to ensure the safety of Cedar Creek. Her leadership inspired trust, and gradually, more people joined in observing and discussing the situation responsibly. Emily also reflected on her own feelings. She realized that fear and worry were natural, but courage was about facing those feelings and taking action anyway. She had confronted Tom once, and she would do so again if necessary, but she also understood the importance of strategy, collaboration, and communication. Her role in the unfolding events was not simply to warn, but to guide, to inspire responsibility, and to help the town act wisely. As the sun set over Cedar Creek, Emily stood at her window, looking toward the hills where Tom's ranch stood silhouetted against the sky. The glowing crates, the strange noises, and the air of mystery still lingered in her mind. But she felt a sense of purpose and determination. She knew that the coming days would test the town's patience, Tom's stubbornness, and her own courage. And she was ready to face it, not as a lone voice of concern, but as part of a community committed to safety, honesty, and the well-being of every person in Cedar Creek. Little did Emily know that her warnings, combined with the growing awareness of the townspeople, were about to ignite events that would challenge every assumption, test loyalties, and push Cedar Creek to the edge of chaos. The story of the stubborn rancher, the brave young woman, and a town caught between fear and responsibility was only just beginning. Emily's concern for Cedar Creek had grown into a quiet determination that refused to let go. She knew that observing and warning were not enough anymore. Tom's mysterious activities on his ranch were increasing, and the strange glow from the crates, combined with the noises that echoed through the hills, could no longer be ignored. Each evening, Emily would watch from a distance, keeping track of the patterns, but the more she observed, the more she realized that something was not right. What Tom was doing was no longer just unusual. It had the potential to be dangerous, and the town needed to know. After several days of careful observation, Emily decided it was time to involve a few trusted neighbors in a more direct investigation. She approached 3 of her closest friends, Jacob, a farmer who knew the land better than anyone, Sarah, a teacher who was calm and logical in her thinking, and Michael, a local handyman who was handy with tools and practical solutions. Emily explained everything she had seen: the glowing crates, the unusual smoke, the strange sounds, and Tom's stubborn refusal to listen. She suggested that together they could quietly investigate the ranch, document what was happening, and then present the evidence to the town council. Jacob was hesitant at first. "We have to be careful," he warned. "Tom is a proud man. If he catches us snooping around his property, he could get angry. We need a plan that keeps us safe." Sarah nodded. "He's right, but we also can't ignore this. If there is any real danger, the town could be at risk." Michael, always practical, suggested, "Let's just observe from a safe distance. We don't have to enter his property. We can use binoculars and take notes. That way we're careful and still know what's going on." The group agreed on the plan. That evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, they met at Emily's house and walked together to a hill that overlooked Tom's ranch. From this vantage point, they could see the barn, the fields, and the area where the strange glow came from. The air was calm, but the tension among the group was noticeable. Each of them understood the seriousness of what they were about to witness. As night fell, the strange activity began again. The glow from the crates became brighter, and the noises grew more pronounced. It was a low, humming sound, almost mechanical, mixed with occasional pops and clanks that echoed through the air. Emily's heart raced as she watched, and she could see that her friends were equally concerned. Jacob whispered, "This doesn't look like normal ranch work. Something is definitely happening here that we don't understand." They observed for several nights, taking careful notes. What they discovered shocked them. Tom was conducting experiments using unusual equipment and chemicals that none of them had ever seen on a typical ranch. He moved with precision, clearly understanding what he was doing, but the work had an air of unpredictability that made the observers nervous. Emily realized that while Tom might be knowledgeable, the potential consequences of his actions could affect the town. If anything went wrong, it could harm the land, the livestock, or even the people nearby. After several nights of careful watching, Emily and her group decided it was time to take the next step. They compiled their notes and observations and presented them to the town council during a scheduled meeting. The council members listened attentively as Emily explained everything, showing the patterns, the unusual activity, and the potential risks. Jacob added his own observations, describing the sounds and how the activity did not match any known farm practices. Sarah explained the logical reasons for concern, emphasizing that safety should come first. Michael offered practical suggestions on how the town could approach Tom without creating a dangerous confrontation. The council was divided. Some members believed that Tom was simply eccentric and that the town had no right to interfere with his property. Others argued that the evidence presented by Emily and her friends was too concerning to ignore. The discussion became heated, with voices raised and opinions clashing. Emily listened quietly, feeling both anxious and proud. She had not expected the council to agree immediately, but she had hoped that her concerns would be taken seriously. Over the next few days, tension in the town increased. People began discussing the situation openly, and whispers turned into arguments. Some townspeople were angry at Tom for ignoring warnings and acting recklessly. Others felt sympathy for him, insisting that he had the right to live as he pleased. Emily found herself in the middle of these debates, trying to explain that the goal was not to punish Tom, but to ensure the safety of Cedar Creek. Her voice was calm and reasoned, but the emotions around her were strong. Meanwhile, Tom remained undisturbed by the growing concern. He continued his experiments, confident in his knowledge and abilities. He had noticed the occasional observers on the hills but had chosen to ignore them. His belief in his independence and expertise was unshakable. Emily, however, knew that ignoring the problem would not make it go away. Something had to be done before the situation escalated further. Emily and her group decided to take a cautious approach. They would try one more time to speak to Tom directly, presenting their concerns as clearly and respectfully as possible. One afternoon, they approached the ranch together, walking slowly along the familiar dirt path. Tom was outside, working near the crates as usual. Emily stepped forward, her heart pounding, and spoke first. "Tom, we have observed your work carefully, and we are concerned. It's not that we don't trust you, but your activities could have serious consequences for the town. Please consider our request to stop or at least slow down until we can find a safe solution." Tom listened quietly, his expression calm but firm. "I appreciate your concern," he said, "but you don't understand. Everything I am doing has a purpose. I am not harming anyone, and I will continue my work. I cannot stop just because others are afraid or don't understand." Emily tried again, explaining the potential risks in detail, using the notes they had collected over several nights. She spoke of the possibility of fire, environmental damage, and accidents that could affect not just the ranch but the surrounding area. Tom nodded occasionally, but his stance did not change. His resolve was strong, and he remained determined to continue his experiments. The group left the ranch feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. They had tried to communicate clearly, respectfully, and logically, but Tom's stubbornness had not allowed for compromise. Emily knew that this confrontation would only increase the tension in Cedar Creek. People would become more aware, more concerned, and possibly more divided. But she also knew that the truth had to be acknowledged. Ignoring the problem was no longer an option. Back in town, the situation escalated further. As news of Tom's refusal spread, emotions ran high. Some townspeople became fearful, worried about what might happen if his experiments went wrong. Others became angry, feeling that Tom's stubbornness was endangering everyone. Emily continued to act as a voice of reason, reminding everyone that the goal was safety, not punishment. She urged calm, careful observation, and thoughtful discussion. Despite the tension, a sense of unity began to emerge among those who shared Emily's concerns. Small groups formed to discuss observations, possible solutions, and ways to approach Tom safely. Emily's leadership inspired others to act responsibly rather than react impulsively. They realized that while Tom's stubbornness posed a challenge, the town's collective care, intelligence, and courage could prevent disaster. As the nights passed, Emily returned to her careful observations of the ranch. She noticed subtle changes in Tom's routines, small adjustments in his work that suggested he was aware of being watched but was choosing to continue. The glowing crates remained, the noises persisted, and the sense of mystery grew stronger. Yet, in the midst of uncertainty, Emily felt a quiet determination. She understood that protecting Cedar Creek would require patience, collaboration, and courage. She was ready to face whatever came next, prepared to guide the town through challenges while keeping everyone as safe as possible. The events at Tom's ranch had transformed Cedar Creek. A town once known for its calm, routine life was now a place of vigilance, concern, and careful discussion. Emily, Jacob, Sarah, and Michael had taken the first steps in uncovering the truth, confronting a challenge that none of them had fully anticipated. The story of the mysterious rancher and the brave townspeople was unfolding, and the coming days would test their courage, resolve, and ability to protect their community. And so, as the glow from the crates continued to illuminate the barn at night, and the low hum of Tom's work echoed through the hills, Cedar Creek stood at the edge of discovery and danger. Emily knew that the next steps would be crucial. The town was watching, the council was debating, and the rancher remained defiant. The mystery of the forbidden activity was no longer just a curiosity. It was a challenge that demanded action, careful thought, and above all, courage. As the days passed, the tension in Cedar Creek reached a boiling point. The town that had once been quiet and predictable was now filled with murmurs of fear, curiosity, and anger. People spoke in hushed tones about Tom's mysterious activities, and each new observation seemed to add fuel to the fire. From the moment Emily and her friends had presented their evidence to the town council, it was clear that Cedar Creek could no longer ignore the situation. The strange glow, the noises, and the unknown work on the ranch had become the center of everyone's attention, and emotions ran high. Emily, as always, remained calm and thoughtful, but she could feel the pressure building. Her friends, Jacob, Sarah, and Michael, were equally concerned. They had tried to approach the problem carefully, hoping to resolve it through observation, communication, and reason. But Tom's stubbornness, combined with the growing unrest in town, made the situation increasingly difficult. Each day brought new challenges, and the sense of unease seemed to spread like wildfire. touching every corner of Cedar Creek. Protests began to form outside Tom's ranch. At first, they were small gatherings, 3 or 4 concerned neighbors standing quietly at the edge of his property, holding signs asking for safety and responsibility. But as word spread, more townspeople joined. Families, teachers, shopkeepers, and even children came to the edge of the fields, hoping to persuade Tom to change his ways. The air was tense, filled with worry and frustration. Many shouted words of caution, urging him to consider the town's safety. Others tried to reason quietly, offering solutions and compromises. But Tom remained unmoved. He continued his work with the same steady determination, as if the voices around him were nothing more than wind through the trees. Inside the town hall, the council meetings became increasingly heated. The once calm discussions now erupted into arguments. One side argued passionately that Tom's activities were dangerous and that the town had a responsibility to intervene. They cited the observations Emily and her friends had carefully documented and warned that continued defiance could lead to serious consequences. The other side defended Tom's right to live as he pleased, emphasizing his independence and the value of respecting private property. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and the meeting often ended without resolution. Emily found herself walking a fine line between fear and determination. She understood that the town was becoming divided. Old friendships were strained. Neighbors who had once trusted each other now whispered doubts and suspicions. Families argued quietly in their homes, wondering whether they should take sides or stay neutral. Emily felt a heavy weight on her shoulders. She had never intended for her concerns to create conflict, but she knew that speaking up had been necessary. The safety of the town depended on awareness, and she could not back down now. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Emily and her friends gathered at the edge of town to observe the ranch once more. The glow from the crates was brighter than ever, and the noises had grown louder, echoing across the fields. Jacob, who had lived his entire life in Cedar Creek, looked at the scene and shook his head. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," he said quietly, "but nothing like this. If something goes wrong, we could all be in danger." Sarah, always calm and logical, added, "We have to be careful. We can't let fear make us act recklessly, but we also can't ignore what's happening. We need to find a way to protect the town without causing more harm." Michael, practical as ever, suggested, "We need to document everything carefully. If the situation escalates, we have proof. That way, the council or authorities can act wisely instead of panicking." As the nights went on, the town's unrest grew. Some residents tried to confront Tom directly, leaving notes on his gate or speaking through the fence. Others formed watch groups, taking turns observing the ranch and reporting any unusual activity. The small town that had once felt safe was now on high alert. Fear and frustration were mixed with a determination to protect the community, and every action seemed to increase the tension. Then came the day when the situation escalated dramatically. A group of townspeople, frustrated by Tom's continued defiance, decided to organize a more forceful protest. They gathered at the edge of his ranch, holding signs, shouting warnings, and demanding that he stop. The crowd grew larger than ever, and the voices carried across the hills, echoing into the barn where Tom worked. For the first time, the rancher stopped and looked out at the assembled crowd. His face remained calm, but his eyes showed a flicker of awareness. Emily stood near the front, her heart pounding. She understood the crowd's fear, but she also worried that their anger could lead to reckless actions. She raised her voice, trying to calm the group. "We need to remain respectful and careful," she shouted. "Our goal is safety, not confrontation. If we act recklessly, we could make things worse for everyone, including ourselves." But the emotions of the crowd were strong. Some people ignored Emily's warnings, shouting louder, waving their fists, and demanding immediate action. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Tom watched silently, seemingly unfazed, and continued his work despite the growing chaos. Emily felt a mix of fear and admiration. He was stubborn, perhaps dangerously so, but he also remained composed in the face of anger and pressure. As the evening progressed, local authorities arrived to observe the situation. They spoke with the council, Emily, and several townspeople, trying to understand the risks and potential consequences. Their presence added both reassurance and tension. People felt safer knowing officials were present, but others were frustrated that no immediate action had been taken against Tom. The town was at a crossroads, caught between fear, responsibility, and the limits of authority. Meanwhile, Emily and her friends continued their careful observations. They documented the crowd's behavior, Tom's actions, and the growing tension in the town. Emily knew that these records would be crucial in guiding future decisions. She also realized that the coming days would require wisdom, patience, and courage. Cedar Creek was no longer a quiet town. It was a place on edge, where every choice had consequences, and every action could escalate the situation further. At home that night, Emily reflected on the events. She understood that the town was struggling with a difficult balance: the right to independence versus the need for safety, the desire for peace versus the inevitability of confrontation. She felt the weight of responsibility, not only for herself but for her neighbors, friends, and the community as a whole. The decisions made now would shape the future of Cedar Creek, and she could not allow fear or anger to dictate their actions. The next day, small groups of townspeople began discussing solutions. Some suggested forming a committee to mediate with Tom, to find a way for him to continue his work safely or to make adjustments that would protect the town. Others proposed stricter oversight or even legal intervention if necessary. Emily and her friends advocated for a careful, measured approach. They emphasized communication, observation, and documentation, insisting that the town act responsibly rather than impulsively. Despite the chaos, moments of unity began to appear. Some neighbors reached out to each other, sharing information and supporting one another. Teachers reassured students, parents comforted children, and community members worked together to maintain daily routines despite the tension. Emily felt a quiet sense of pride in her town. Even amid fear and anger, people were trying to act thoughtfully and responsibly, guided by concern for each other. Yet, the situation remained unstable. Tom continued his work on the ranch, undeterred by the protests, the council meetings, or the watchful eyes of the townspeople. The glow from the crates, the hum of his equipment, and the air of mystery persisted. Cedar Creek was caught between two forces: the stubborn independence of one man and the collective concern of a community that refused to stand by silently. Emily realized that the coming days would be critical. The town's patience was wearing thin, and the potential for conflict was high. She knew that careful leadership, calm communication, and thoughtful action were essential. Cedar Creek had reached a turning point, where courage and responsibility would determine whether the town could navigate the crisis safely or be consumed by chaos. As night fell over the hills, Emily stood at her window, looking toward the ranch. The glowing crates and the rhythmic hum of activity were a constant reminder that the town's struggle was far from over. But she also felt a quiet determination. She understood that fear, anger, and stubbornness were part of human nature, but so were courage, care, and the desire to protect others. She was ready to face whatever came next, to guide the town with wisdom and resolve, and to confront the challenges that lay ahead. Cedar Creek had changed forever. What began as a quiet, peaceful town was now a community united in vigilance, concern, and courage. Emily knew that the story of the stubborn rancher and the determined townspeople was far from over. The next chapter would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and push everyone to act with courage, wisdom, and compassion. The town had reached a tipping point, and the choices made now would shape the future for years to come. The tension in Cedar Creek had reached its highest point. The town that once felt calm and safe was now alive with anxiety, debate, and cautious vigilance. The glowing crates, the strange noises, and Tom's unwavering determination had become the center of attention for every resident. People walked carefully along the streets, discussing what they had seen or heard. Some feared for their safety, others feared for the town's future, and a few feared the division growing among neighbors. Emily, however, remained focused. She understood that panic could only make matters worse, and she resolved to guide the town through the difficult days ahead. Early one morning, Emily, Jacob, Sarah, and Michael met at her house to plan the next step. The night before the protests had grown louder, the council had debated longer, and Tom had remained as stubborn as ever. Emily suggested they try a final, carefully organized approach, one that would combine observation, communication, and the support of the town council. "We have to act wisely," she said. "The goal is not to punish Tom. The goal is to protect everyone and find a solution that works. If we act recklessly, it could backfire." The group agreed. They would invite Tom to meet with a small committee of town leaders, Emily, and her friends. They hoped that by presenting the facts calmly and showing the concern of the community, they could convince him to adjust his activities or take precautions to ensure safety. The plan was delicate, but Emily knew it was necessary. The town could no longer wait. The meeting was arranged for late afternoon. Tom arrived at the town hall with his usual calm demeanor, carrying a notebook filled with his observations and calculations. Emily noticed the quiet confidence in his eyes, but she also sensed a flicker of curiosity. He wanted to hear what the town had to say. The room was filled with townspeople, council members, and Emily's friends. Everyone was quiet, waiting to see how the meeting would unfold. Emily began by speaking. "Tom," she said, "we have watched and documented your activities over several weeks. We are not here to judge you or take away your independence. We are here because we care about you, the town, and the safety of everyone involved. Your work is unusual and it has caused concern. We want to find a solution that allows you to continue safely or, at the very least, ensures that no one is at risk." Jacob, Sarah, and Michael added their observations. They spoke carefully, describing the glow, the sounds, and the patterns they had noticed. They emphasized that their goal was protection, not punishment. Even as they spoke, some townspeople murmured in agreement while others nodded in support. Emily noticed that Tom was listening, and for the first time she saw a change in his expression. His eyes, which had always been firm and unyielding, now showed a trace of contemplation. Tom finally spoke. "I understand your concerns," he said slowly. "I never intended to cause fear or anger. My work has a purpose, and I have been careful, but I can see that it has affected the town more than I realized. I am willing to make adjustments to ensure safety, but I cannot stop entirely. I hope you can understand that my intentions were never harmful." Emily felt a sense of relief, but she remained cautious. "We understand, Tom," she said gently. "We just need you to take precautions. Keep us informed, adjust your schedule, and let us know if anything changes. That way everyone can feel safe and your work can continue responsibly." Tom nodded. "Agreed," he replied. "I will do my best to ensure safety, and I appreciate your concern and patience." The town collectively breathed a sigh of relief. The tension that had gripped Cedar Creek began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. People who had been angry, fearful, or anxious slowly began to feel a renewed sense of community. Emily's careful planning and calm approach had worked. By combining observation, communication, and collaboration, the town had avoided a direct confrontation that could have caused harm or lasting divisions. Over the following weeks, Tom made changes. He adjusted his work schedule to minimize disturbances. set up safety measures around his experiments, and occasionally invited Emily and her friends to observe and provide feedback. The glowing crates were still present, but the strange noises were less pronounced, and the townspeople could see that precautions were in place. Cedar Creek gradually returned to a sense of normalcy, though the memory of the tension lingered as a reminder of the town's resilience. Emily reflected on the events with a mixture of pride and humility. She had been afraid at times, worried about the town's safety, and uncertain whether her actions would be effective. Yet, by remaining calm, thoughtful, and courageous, she had helped guide the town through a challenging period. She realized that courage was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was quiet determination, careful planning, and the willingness to speak up even when others were hesitant. The townspeople, too, learned important lessons. They saw that fear and anger could escalate situations, but patience, observation, and collaboration could resolve conflicts safely. Relationships that had been strained began to heal. Neighbors who had argued over the correct approach found common ground in their shared concern for the town. The community emerged stronger, more aware, and more united than before. Tom also reflected on his own actions. He realized that his independence, while important, came with responsibility. By listening to Emily and the town council, he could continue his work without causing fear or danger. He respected the courage it took for Emily and her friends to speak up, and understood that their concern came from care, not criticism. Over time, he developed a cautious respect for the town's input, balancing his desire for independence with the collective responsibility he shared with his neighbors. As summer turned to autumn, Cedar Creek settled into a renewed sense of peace. The fields were green, the school bell rang as usual, and the streets echoed with friendly greetings. Emily continued her work at the general store, now with a quiet pride in the role she had played. She often walked past Tom's ranch, seeing the glow from the crates and hearing the distant hum of his equipment. Unlike before, these sounds no longer brought fear. They were a reminder of how courage, communication, and collaboration had restored balance to the town. The story of the stubborn rancher, the brave young woman, and the concerned townspeople became part of Cedar Creek's collective memory. Parents told their children about Emily's courage and patience, and teachers discussed the importance of speaking up responsibly. The town had faced fear, uncertainty, and conflict, and emerged with a deeper understanding of responsibility, safety, and the value of community. In the end, Cedar Creek was forever changed. The quiet, predictable town had experienced a trial that tested its people, its values, and its ability to work together. Through careful observation, thoughtful communication, and courageous action, Emily and the townspeople had preserved their community while respecting the independence of one determined man. The lessons learned from those weeks of tension and uncertainty would guide the town for generations. That courage comes in many forms, that responsibility is shared, and that even the most stubborn challenges can be overcome through understanding, patience, and collaboration. As the sun set behind the hills one evening, Emily stood on the porch of her home, watching the warm colors of the sky reflect off the fields. She smiled softly, thinking of the journey the town had taken together. Cedar Creek was no longer just a quiet town. It was a community capable of facing challenges, learning from them, and growing stronger. And at the heart of that story was a young woman who refused to remain silent, a reminder that even in small towns, courage and compassion can change the course of many lives.